I always believed that strange events started with one simple moment or decision. For me, that moment began on a normal Monday when I started working at the Fairview Grand Hotel, a choice that would change my life in ways I never expected. I took the job just to pay the bills, thinking a few months of desk work in an old hotel would be boring. But sometimes, the past sticks to a place like old wallpaper or creaky floorboards. At the Fairview Grand, a hidden secret in room 913 would change everything. It was a hot August morning, the kind where the air feels heavy and sticky. The hotel was old and grand, with shiny marble floors, tall windows, and long hallways that seemed to whisper old secrets. I had read that the hotel was built in 1927, and people said its history was full of mysterious events. My first week passed without any problems. I learned how to use the reservation system, greeted guests with a friendly smile, and even charmed some of the regular customers. But soon, something strange began to bother me. Every time I checked our computer for the room list, room 913 always showed as occupied. I assumed it was just a computer mistake. After all, an old hotel like this had its quirks. I remember it clearly, one Tuesday afternoon, as the sun set and golden light filled the lobby. I noticed something odd. Every other room had recent check-in and check-out dates. But room 913 had a check-in date from over a year ago and no recorded checkout. The guest's name was missing and replaced by dashes. I hesitated. Was it a mistake? I asked my boss, Mr. Dalton, who was a middle-aged man with graying hair and a strict smile. "Ah, room 913, he said, as if it were nothing special. "It's just a system glitch." The old manager worried about it, but nothing ever happened. We just ignore it. His tone did not invite more questions. So I went back to my work. But that evening, after my shift ended and I was alone in the lobby, I could not stop thinking about room 913. I felt drawn to the door marked with that number. It was at the end of a narrow corridor on the second floor. The brass numbers were old and dull, and the air near it felt colder than the summer heat outside. I wasn't superstitious until that day. Still, something told me that something was not right. With my keys jingling in my pocket, I walked down the corridor. My footsteps echoed on the worn carpet as I reached room 913. The door was slightly open, as if inviting me in. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open just a little. Inside, the room was dimly lit. Heavy curtains covered the windows, and a small lamp on an old bedside table cast long, eerie shadows on the walls. I stepped in, and the creak of the floorboards sounded like a soft warning. Then I realized I was not alone. At the far end of the room, near the window, stood a faint figure. At first, it looked like a wisp of smoke rather than a person. I froze. The figure was bent over, its back turned to me. I tried to speak, but my voice stuck in my throat. It was as if I had stepped into a world beyond the ordinary. I took a small step forward, and the figure slowly turned its head. In that moment, I saw eyes that shone with an intense, eerie light. They were full of sadness and something even darker. The eyes met mine, and I felt a cold shiver run through me. Who are you?" I managed to ask in a shaky whisper. The figure said nothing. Its eyes stayed fixed on me, both inviting and warning me not to come closer. Before I could think of what to do next, I heard footsteps behind me in the corridor. My heart jumped into my throat. I turned around and saw the door to room 913 slowly closing. The mysterious figure did not move. It stayed there, as if it belonged to that room. I ran out of the room as fast as I could and headed back to the busy lobby, surrounded by the chatter of guests and the hum of the air conditioner. I tried to convince myself that I had imagined everything, but I couldn't forget those eyes, the silent, unblinking eyes of a guest who had checked in long ago and never left. The next day, I approached Mr. Dalton again, needing answers. "Sir, about room 913. I need to know if there's any record of a guest there," I said, my voice trembling. He looked at me with narrowed eyes, as if deciding whether I was serious or mistaken. I told you, it's just a system error. Some guests have complained about strange noises and feeling watched. But nothing real has happened. It's just one of those old hotel legends. But to me, it was more than a legend. It felt like a presence that defied explanation. That night, I couldn't sleep. I dreamed of endless hallways and mysterious voices just beyond my hearing. Every creak in the corridors reminded me of that strange guest. Curiosity kept growing inside me. So during my breaks, I began asking quiet questions about the hotel's past. I looked through old ledgers and dusty documents in the back office, hoping to learn more about room 913. Slowly, I pieced together a story that was both sad and scary. The record said that room 913 once belonged to a man named Edward Harrow, a quiet, reclusive man who checked in during the late 1940s. People whispered that he was a scholar of strange things, a man who was interested in the occult. They said he would wander the halls at night, muttering about the darkness that calls and the eternal door. One bitter winter, after many mysterious events, Harrow vanished without a trace. The only clue was a hurried note left in his room that read, "I have gone beyond, where time has no hold." Over the years, rumors spread. Some said Harrow's spirit stayed in the room, trapped by his own choices. Others claimed that every time a new guest checked in, a chill would fill the corridor near room 913, and soft footsteps could be heard when no one was there. I found these stories both fascinating and frightening. One rainy evening, while I was closing up at the front desk, an elderly guest approached me. Her eyes were bright, and her silver hair was neatly done. "Excuse me, dear," she said softly. "Do you know the story of Edward Harrow?" I hesitated, not sure if I should share what I had learned. But her gentle tone made me speak. "I've heard bits and pieces. They say he was involved with things we can't understand, that his spirit still roams these halls." She nodded slowly, as if she understood far more than she let on. "Yes, my dear. I once stayed in room 912, and I could feel it, the presence of something heavy, as if someone was watching from the shadows. They say Harrow's spirit could never leave, because he made a deal with forces beyond our world." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. That night, as I lay awake in my small apartment above the hotel, I couldn't stop thinking about her story. Could it be that Edward Harrow's spirit was the guest who never checked out? And if so, what did it mean for the hotel, and for me, who now held his secret? Even though I was scared, I found myself drawn back to room 913. I began to stand near the door during quiet moments, hoping to catch another glimpse of that mysterious guest. One slow, foggy morning when the hotel was almost empty, I walked down the corridor until I reached room 913 again. This time, I pushed the door open fully and stepped inside. The room looked just as I remembered, dim, with heavy air and the smell of old books and a faint hint of metal. In an armchair by the window sat a man. His face was thin and lined with sadness, and his eyes shone with a strange, otherworldly light. I whispered, "Edward," not sure if I should even say his name. The man slowly turned to face me, and I saw deep, unspoken pain in his eyes, a silent plea for help. But before I could say more, I heard a creak behind me. I turned to see a young maintenance worker standing in the doorway, confused. In that moment, the man in the armchair seemed to fade away into the shadows. The worker mumbled an apology and left, leaving me trembling with fear and wonder. I closed the door with shaking hands, my heart racing. Had I really seen Edward Harrow, or was it just my imagination? One thing was clear. Every time I stepped into room 913, it felt like entering a place between two worlds, a threshold where the living and something else met. In the days that followed, my nights were filled with haunting dreams of that gaunt figure. I dreamed of endless hallways, doors that led nowhere, and voices whispering secrets just out of reach. I woke up drenched in sweat, the image of those sorrowful eyes burning in my mind. I knew I couldn't let fear stop me, so I began writing everything down. I kept a small leather journal hidden behind the front desk and wrote down every strange event, the unexpected creak in the hall, the sudden chill in the lobby, the feeling of being watched. I even quietly asked guests if they had felt anything unusual. Many said they felt a deep sadness near room 913 or saw a shadow that shouldn't have been there. One rainy night, a middle-aged guest confided in me while I was checking him in. "I stayed at this hotel many years ago," he said softly. "I remember room 913 well, not because it was comfortable, but because I always felt dread passing its door. It was as if someone was always watching me. At night, I'd sometimes hear footsteps that were not my own." His words struck a chord with me, and I wrote them in my journal. The more I learned, the more I was convinced that room 913 was not just a computer glitch. It was a place filled with a mysterious, heavy presence that affected everyone who came near. One day, driven by a need for answers, I decided to talk to Marisol, a longtime maid who had worked at the hotel for many years. Marisol was quiet, but seemed to know all the hotel's secrets. "Marisol," I began one day during my break, "have you ever heard anything strange about room 913? She paused and looked toward the door. "Ah, room 913, she said softly, almost as if it were a forbidden name. "That room has its own memory. When I was young, I heard soft, sad whispers coming from behind that door. Some say it holds the spirit of a man who cannot let go of his past. Others believe the room is cursed and traps souls who go too deep. I always stayed away, just as I was taught." Her words confirmed what I had begun to suspect. "Do you know anything about Edward Harrow?" I asked quietly. Marisol's eyes filled with a mix of sadness and understanding. "He was a troubled man, Mr. Harrow, a man who looked for answers in things we cannot understand. When he vanished, his spirit never left. It lingered, like a silent guardian trapped between worlds." Her answer sent a chill through me. I left her with more questions than answers, but with a strong desire to solve the mystery of room 913. Every day at work, I noticed small odd details: a faded footprint by the door, a soft murmur when no one was around. The hotel, once a simple workplace, had turned into a maze of secrets, and I was pulled deeper into its mystery. One stormy evening, after a long shift, the power went out. The lobby went dark, and a heavy silence fell over the hotel. I grabbed my flashlight and headed down the dark corridor. That's when I heard it, a slow, steady tapping coming from room 913. My heart pounded as I recognized the pattern: tap, pause, tap, pause. It was coming from the direction of that door. I crept toward room 913, my flashlight beam shaking in my hand. As I got closer, the tapping grew louder, echoing in the silence. I slowly reached out and opened the door. This time, the room glowed with an eerie, pale light from no clear source. The shadows on the walls moved as if they were alive. In the middle of the room sat a small, old desk with a heavy ledger on it. Its pages were filled with handwritten notes, dates, names, and strange comments about rituals, deals, and a guest who never left. I flipped through the pages with trembling hands, trying to understand the messy writing. Just as I read the last entry, the tapping stopped suddenly. The silence was so deep it hurt my ears. I felt someone behind me. I turned around and saw a man standing in the doorway. He was not a ghost this time, but a real guest in an old-fashioned suit. His eyes were sad, and his face showed deep regret. "Are you the keeper?" he asked softly. I blinked, confused. "Keeper? I'm just an employee." "Who are you?" He sighed heavily. "I'm the guest who checked in long ago. I came here seeking answers, and I ended up trapped." His voice was full of sorrow and loneliness. For a moment, I couldn't speak. "Trapped? How?" I finally asked. He stepped forward. The soft light revealed more details of his face, lines of pain and eyes that held many years of regret. "I made a deal with powers I did not understand. I thought I could unlock the secrets of life and time. Instead, I chained my soul to this place. I have waited and hoped that someone would free me from this endless night." A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the inscription on the old photo and the quiet warnings I had heard. Everything was coming together in a way I had never imagined. "Is there a way to break the curse?" I asked in a nearly whispering voice. He met my eyes, a tiny spark of hope amid his sadness. "There is always a price," he said quietly. "To free me, you must face the darkness that holds this place captive. You must find the heart of the curse and have the courage to break it, even if it costs you dearly." I hesitated, realizing how big his request was, but I could not walk away now, not after being so deeply involved. "What do I have to do?" I asked, gathering all my courage. He pointed to the ledger. "Inside these pages, you will find clues, a map, a ritual, and a set of symbols that need to be reversed. But be careful, the forces here are not kind. They will test your strength, your mind, and even your soul." That night, I spent hours by candlelight, reading the ledger and trying to understand the ritual. Every word took me further into a world of forbidden secrets, a place where time did not matter and the line between life and death was very thin. In the following days, I prepared for the ritual. I gathered old books on the occult, scraps of paper with ancient symbols, and even some old artifacts from the hotel's storeroom that seemed to hum with a strange energy. To break the curse on Edward Harrow, I had to step deep into the unknown and face a darkness that had long lived inside these walls. Late one night, when the hotel was silent and dark, I returned to room 913 with my gathered items. I cleared a space in the middle of the room and arranged everything as the ledger instructed. I lit candles in the four corners. The room took on a strange, almost magical quality as the candle flames flickered and cast long, dancing shadows on the peeling walls. I began to recite the words of the ritual, my voice shaking as I called on powers I barely understood. The temperature in the room dropped, and the air seemed to vibrate with an old, powerful force. For a moment, I felt as if I stood on the edge of two worlds, and the line between them was disappearing. Then, as I finished the final words, the door creaked open behind me. The ghostly figure of Edward Harrow appeared again. He stood silently, his eyes full of both thanks and sorrow, as if he had waited for this moment forever. For a few seconds, time seemed to stop. A deep, echoing voice filled the room, a voice that did not seem entirely his own. "The price must be paid," it said. In that moment, I felt a sharp pain in my chest, as if something unseen was trying to pull my very soul out. The candles flickered wildly, and the room turned chaotic. Shadows twisted on the walls into shapes I could not understand. I stumbled back, fighting to keep my focus on the ritual. The words that once came clearly now blurred and twisted in my mind. In the middle of the chaos, I saw Edward Harrow's form wavering between pain and relief. I knew that if I stopped, the dark forces would consume us both. Drawing on every bit of strength, I repeated the incantation louder and steadier, even as my voice cracked with fear and determination. The heavy darkness pressed in, and I felt the icy grip of an ancient power trying to take hold of me. Yet, I did not stop, driven by the desperate hope of freeing a troubled soul, and maybe freeing a part of myself. After what felt like an eternity, a deep silence fell. The weight lifted as if a huge burden had been removed. The dancing shadows calmed, and the candle flames steadied, glowing gently. Edward Harrow's ghost grew fainter, a look of bittersweet thanks on his face. "Thank you," he whispered, and then, like a breeze, he was gone. I sank to the floor, shaking, as the echoes of the ritual surrounded me. In that moment, I realized that the price had been paid, but I could only wonder what it had cost me. The room, once heavy with sorrow, now felt lighter and freer. Yet I knew that the forces I had faced were not so easily defeated. They still lived in the corners of the hotel, in the rustling pages of old books, and in the soft whispers of forgotten voices. In the weeks that followed, something changed at the Fairview Grand. The cold, heavy feeling in the hallways began to fade, replaced by a gentle calm. Guests even commented that the lobby felt warmer, and the staff seemed happier. I returned to my work with a new respect for the mysterious line between the natural and the supernatural. I kept my journal, now filled not only with strange events, but also with hints of hope and healing. Every time I passed room 913, I felt a mix of sadness and relief, as if I were saying goodbye to a troubled soul. Sometimes, I would catch a glimpse of a shadow or see a faint face in a suit by a window. In those moments, I remembered Edward Harrow's last words. The price must be paid. I had paid that price, and in doing so, I had changed the course of the hotel's history. Months later, I moved on from the Fairview Grand. But the lessons I learned there stayed with me. I know now that if you ever find yourself in a place where the past refuses to fade, where the whispers of old souls echo in the silence, you must tread very carefully. For sometimes, a simple door can open a path into worlds you never imagined. When I close my eyes at night, I sometimes see the faint outline of a man in a suit standing by a window, his eyes full of quiet longing, and I smile, knowing that even though some secrets have been uncovered, the mystery still lives on, a reminder that every choice we make, every door we open, can lead us into adventures beyond our wildest dreams.